It's bread. In restaurants, it's usually not included in the bill. And this is water. It's next to the table. And you can order water and bread in each restaurant. It's just basic. Have you ever thought about the price of democracy? What price has each of you paid for the opportunity to freely elect your political leaders, read independent newspapers, freely express yourself, go to the meetings? Air, freedom, democracy, they can just exist. They cannot be existing. In free societies, democracy is taken for granted, like bread and water. But there are people who deprived such opportunity. There are countries where moral police can kill 15-year-old girl just for not wearing chador. There are countries where you can be sentenced for 15 years just for calling war a war. And there are countries like Belarus, for example, where hundreds of journalists can be arrested just for covering anti-government protests. And this is my country, 42 million Ukraine. My country today is democracy at war. And if you know the real price of democracy, you can ask Ukraine about it. For the last 8 months, each of us has been paying the highest price for the opportunity to be independent. This is price measure human lives. And we are speaking about thousands of victims among civilians and Ukrainian military. Ukrainian struggle and resistance are highly talking everywhere. It had been compared with a battle between David and Goliath from biblical story. But what else Ukrainian struggle for independence can teach us all? I have 3 answers to these questions. Not to think in stereotypes and prejudice, not only about people, but also about nations and countries. To fight, even nobody believed that you can win. And the third one, nothing can be taken for granted. Democracy is neither. I will start with the first one. How often have you fallen victim to other stereotypes about yourself, and how often you stereotypically think about yourself? I was born in Uzbekistan. When I was 2.5 years old, my family moved to Crimea. We lived poorly. Sometimes we even didn't have money to buy bread. I did poorly in primary school due to dyslexia. My school essays were full of mistakes, and I was bullied for being Crimean Tatar girl, person of other nationality, religion, and skin color. Of course, it's hard to imagine from 1995 that I'm staying on this stage, that I'm chief editor of Ukrainska Pravda, and it's even hard to imagine for my classmates that. The same stereotypes exist not only about people, but also about countries and nations. What did you know about Ukraine 10, 20, or 5 years ago? 10 years ago, when I had to talk to foreigners, I had to explain the difference between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine was known as a poor country somewhere in Europe. It was known by Chernobyl, maybe thanks Andrei Shevchenko, football player from Milan, and as a main transporter of Russian cheap gas to Europe. My country has given a not pleasant role in geopolitics books as well, to become a buffer zone between Europe and Russia. But how is it possible that Ukraine overcame all these stereotypes and decided to choose European path only few of post-Soviet countries? I have the answer of this question, and it's on rethinking its own history. When I was 10 years old, I didn't feel difference between Ukraine and Russia too. Because at school, teachers told us that it's no difference between Russian and Ukrainian language, that collapse of the Soviet Union was the biggest mistake, because Russian propaganda did it for centuries, for hundreds of years. And then I learned the history of my nation from my grandmother. She told me about the crime of Soviet authorities, deportation of Crimean Tatar people. 300,000 people were deported from Crimea in one day. Among them were kids and women. We were not allowed to go to Crimea for 50 years. The same stories heard my peers. They learned the story of Holodomor, for example, famine that Soviet authorities organized in Ukraine, where more than 5 million people died. They learned about labor camps, where thousands of Ukrainians also died. For centuries, Soviet Empire was trying to destroy my country, destroy Ukrainian, and that we will lose our identity. But the truth helped us become stronger. And truth helped to overcome stereotypes about my nation as well. Three generations of my nation had no chance to have even education. But then I became a graduate in university. I've been graduated university in 2004. Also, my country overcame stereotypes about itself. It's Orange Revolution, the first battle for European choice of Ukrainian people. This year, in 2004, I was just 17 years old student. It was my first year at university. I didn't have even chance to vote, but Russian candidate is supposed to be a new president of Ukraine. And people said no. No, it will not happen. Yes, Ukraine this year had chosen European path of development. But democracy was still very fragile, and as a human being, also country can make some mistakes, and one of these mistakes was presidential election in 2010, when the Russian candidate became a new president. In 2013, he was trying to cancel this European path of development. And people again said no. The revolution of dignity ended up with killing more than 100 protesters. Russian president left country. And that time, Russia understood that she will lose Ukraine forever. 8 years ago, with occupation of my native Crimea, Russia started war against Ukraine. For the last 8 months, we live in full-scale war. And here I want to go to the second lesson. To fight even when the enemy is stronger and the whole world is convinced that you have no chance of winning. In the beginning of war, everyone was thinking that maybe Ukraine will be defeated in 3 days. Today is 254th day of this battle. Of course, Ukraine pays like really high price. Human lives. And I want to mention only three stories. This is Vika. She worked as a sommelier in supermarket. She was pregnant, 6 months pregnant. And she was killed together with her husband and unborn child in the middle of October. Because Iranian drone destroyed their house. Their house located just 400 meters from mine. This is Lisa. She was 5 years old. She was killed by a missile attack in Vinnytsia. This morning, together with her mom, she went to speech therapy session. And this is father of my colleague, Valery Kizilov. He was killed by a Russian soldier in Bucha in the beginning of March. But it will not stop us. Ukraine will fight, because life will overcome death, and light will overcome darkness. And we fight for it every single day. But this war is not only for Ukrainian independence. This is war for the future of democracy and the ability to world to unite. And I want to go to the third lesson. Democracy is not something that is given once and it all. For the decades, Europe has taken democracy for granted, like bread and water on the table. But reality has changed dramatically for the last 8 months. Some weeks ago, the famous European politician Joseph Borrell told us that European prosperity was based for decades on Russian cheap gas and Chinese market. Both China and Russia have been authoritarian regimes for the decades. They violate human rights. So Europe has deliberately increased its dependence from totalitarian regimes. And we need to find a quick responses. Yes, air, freedom, democracy, bread, water is not something that you can pay for. No one will ask you to add it in your life bill. And I thought about it before March 2022, when I saw this. The inhabitants of bombed Mariupol, they were trying to bake bread in the ruins of their houses. And they melted snow just to have at least some drinking water. I hope those lessons of Ukrainian struggle will teach us. Please, democracy is not something that can be taken for granted. You have to struggle, you have to fight for it. Thank you.